much.
Alright, let's talk about it. A lot of people have sent me this video and asked me what the hell is going on, what's up with the confusion on the belts. Let me try to break this down as quickly as possible, even though it probably won't be quick at all. So to understand what's going on between Petr Yan and who I assume is one of the UFC staff members in this video, we first have to talk about the different types of belts that exist. So this is going to be a bit of an oversimplification, but it's the best way to get through this. You could think of the belts as existing in three distinct tiers. The first one is the replica that you and I can buy on the UFC website. The second one would be a travel belt, and the third one would be a real belt. So what I'm carrying over my shoulder here is an official UFC shop replica belt. This is the belt that you can go onto the UFC store or UFC collectibles or at one of the live events and buy. They are mass produced on a large scale. They're decent quality, but realistically, nothing on here is going to be handmade. Most of the time, the leather strap is not going to be actual leather. Some of the WWE ones are a little bit better, but for the most part, the UFC ones, they use a faux or simulation leather. They're really not bad replicas, but the point is these are just mass-produced, really high-quality toys. Now for a moment, let's skip travel belts and talk about real belts. Real belts are the belts that are given to champions in the octagon or ring or whatever, depending on the combat sport. Real belts are more often than not handmade. They're extremely high quality. They'll usually have a lot more precious metals, diamonds, more gold material, and almost always the leather strap will be a full grain leather, 100% genuine, no faux leather, no simulation leather, nothing like that. And real belts typically have a lot more detail, some more nuanced things like the dimples that exist on the real belt that don't exist on the outside of this officially licensed replica belt. Things like the pattern that exists behind the UFC banner in the middle right here. Things like this boomerang plate, which on the real one is actually pointy on both ends rather than this trapezoid looking thing. A real UFC belt is often rumored to cost anywhere between $30,000 to $100,000. You see all these random numbers. A lot of them are not true, but the reality is it is very expensive and much more valuable than the replica belt. As much as I'd love to pull out a real UFC belt, put it over my shoulder and show you guys how incredible it is, I don't think a real UFC belt, the type of belt that will be wrapped around a champion's waist by Dana White in the octagon, has ever made into the hands of any private collectors, but many other real belts have. So for reference, here is a real Strikeforce belt made by Champions Craft. The belt maker's name was Orlando Roman. This is a real belt. This is a belt that Scott Coker would wrap around a champion's waist. You can see right there the patch on the back. The maker's mark is right here on the bottom of the plate. You probably can't see it because of the focus. But this is a real, extremely heavy, high quality, a real Strikeforce belt. The last belt that is like this, that's sold on the private market, sold on eBay, I think for close to $15,000. I did not pay anywhere near that much. I got very lucky with this belt. The point is, they are not cheap. They are handmade. They are the pinnacle of belt collecting. Real belts, especially from a name like Strikeforce, Bellator, UFC, PFL, WEC, Pride, etc. And before I put it away, you could see the back is fully covered up with an additional layer of very supple leather. It has a fully metal belt tip. A lot of details. Again, if you don't know what you're looking for, you might not be able to tell the difference. The point is, this was made by the belt maker who designed it. It was meticulously crafted, very high quality. A lot of time, effort, and love goes into making these belts. Now let's go back to what we skipped and talk about travel belts. Travel belts are somewhere between real belts and replica belts. A travel belt is typically mass-produced for the most part, but it has some sort of intervention by either a belt maker or some sort of artist. So for UFC, it'll usually be a plate similar to this one that's on the shop belts that you and I can go buy from UFCshop.com, but it'll be on real leather. Sometimes it'll have a slightly different boomerang, so it won't be the completely pointy one with both sides. It'll have a little bit of an arch piece of metal here in the middle. It'll almost always have the fighter's name and the card that they won their belt on the side plate. The point is, it's somewhere between this shop replica, right, or this officially mass-produced replica that we can go buy, and a real belt. Now we have to talk about the system that the UFC has set in place for belts. Since debuting this new design, which they call the Legacy Belt, the idea is every champion gets one single belt, and every time they defend, they get a travel belt. So Petr Yan is now a champion for the second time in his career, meaning he has a real belt at home. He has the belt with all the bells and whistles at home or wherever he put it. So for the second title reign, he doesn't get another real belt. But of course, Dana White has to wrap a real belt around every champion's waist every single time. What he will get is a new travel belt. So every time they defend, they get two things. A travel belt that has that card's information on the side plate, and they also get the side plate on their real belt back home replaced to include the rubies of every single defense they've had. And so if you're a champion who's had 3 title defenses, your real belt should have 3 rubies, and you should have 3 travel belts with 1 ruby each, 1 for each defense you've made. Now, of course, the UFC doesn't ask every champion to bring their belt to every event. But if somebody is fighting for a belt for the first time, they don't have a real belt. Dana White and his team have a set number of real belts that they use for production, that they use to wrap around the waist of folks, and then they get things figured out later. So in Pyotr's case, they wrapped a real belt around his waist. Had he never had a first title reign, they would have sent him a real belt, or maybe let him go home with that one. But because he had one, what he should have taken home was a travel belt. And that was the belt that the UFC staff was trying to switch out with the one he had. Now, if you look at the Instagram stories of people like Islam Makhachev, Valentina Shevchenko, even Joshua Van, you'll notice that they have more than one belt. It's usually the real belt and the travel belt. You'll notice the travel belt is almost always missing the dimples around the edges, it's missing the pattern around the banner, all those things I mentioned before. Joshua Van's case, it made sense for him to go home with 2 belts. The real belt, the one worth a lot of money, probably handmade or, made more meticulously, and a travel belt, a cheaper kind of middle-of-the-road option for him to travel around with, hence the name travel belt. Now, for some reason, Joshua Van put his travel belt in a glass case at home and then took his real belt to what looked like the different parties he went to celebrate. I think he got them reversed. I'll message him and let him know. But essentially, that is what happened. Petr was not supposed to go home with a second real belt. UFC staff tried to give him a travel belt. He clearly had said no to them a couple times. The guy seemed frustrated, hence there was no handshake. There's all these different stories and speculations. He had Merab's belt. He wanted to take the nicer belt home. The idea is he did want to take the nicer belt home. I can't blame him. They're absolutely incredible. But yeah, after I edit this, if I can fit some B-roll in of different belts, you can look at different examples and kind of get a better idea.